Hello and welcome to day 9 of Roots. Today we'll be discussing midline stability and pelvic tilt. Now, when I refer to midline stability, I am referring to having enough core engagement of your entire torso, not just your abdomen, as to maintain a neutral spinal position. And a neutral spine has natural curves in it. There is the lumbar curve, thoracic curve, and cervical curve. And through midline stability, we should be able to maintain these curves, which are a neutral spine. Now, pelvic tilt has a big role to play in how we do or do not engage a stable midline. And pelvic tilt is just what direction is our pelvis tilting in a given posture or pose. So the idea of loops can be really helpful in achieving a stable midline. We can think about one loop happening around the pelvic region, one loop happening around the midline or the middle section where our ribs and our bellies meet, and then a third loop happening around the chest and the shoulder region. So what I'd like to do is walk you through these loops and demonstrate them and have you try them out for yourself so that you can learn how to apply them in your own postures and poses. Okay, so to go through these 3 loops that are going to help you maintain midline stability, we are going to start at the loop that's happening around our pelvis. So we can think about this loop as moving, which direction? Backwards and down. So if we think about a loop that loops the pubic bone up toward the belly button and then drops the tailbone down between the heels, we can think about this looping action around the pelvic region. As we come up to more of the center or midline of our torso, where the low ribs and the belly meet, we're going to think about a loop that loops in the opposite direction. So now we want this loop to go take the low ribs down toward the belly button, and it loops back and around so the low ribs and the back body lift up toward the heart. So we're going to be thinking about this kind of forward looping action through this middle section of our torso. Then as we get up into the shoulder and chest region, the loop is going to match that of the pelvic region. So now the loop is turning back again, and this loop now is going to lift the sternum and drop the shoulder blades down the back. So we lift and drop at the same time so that all of these loops end up kind of canceling each other out and setting ourselves into a nice neutral position of the spine. Now, all 3 of these loop actions balance the others and help us maintain midline stability. And practicing these loops helps to reduce release valves throughout our system energetically and physically. From my experience, release valves are associated with physical compensations that lead to injury and imbalance over time. An example of a release valve would be when we stand with our pelvis tilting forward, our low ribs jutting out, and creating this excessive arch in the low back. Over time, this is not going to serve us well. We will probably develop pain in the low back. So what we want to do is learn how to create midline stability through the proper positioning of our pelvis and engagement of these 3 loops. It's really important when considering the longevity and the health of not only your body, but also of your yoga practice over time. All right, so what I'd like to do now is walk you through 3 different ways for you to find midline stability. We'll first start lying on our backs, then we'll move to lying on our bellies, and finally we'll do this practice while standing up. Okay, so come on down to your back. And have your knees bent, your feet flat on the floor. Arms can rest at your sides or across your belly, whatever's comfortable for you. And situate yourself so that you feel evenly distributed right and left. Now, notice how your spine is organized as you lay here with your back along the floor. What you'll notice is that your pelvis, your sacrum, the very bottom portion of your spine, is in contact with the floor. As you move up the spine, you'll notice the low back, also known as the lumbar curve, gently curves away from the floor and creates a small gap between your back and the floor. As you continue moving up, your mid back and upper back, where your rib cage is, this is your thoracic spine, it is in contact with the floor. And finally, as you move up into the neck, the cervical spine region, this again curves away from the floor and creates a gap between your neck and the floor. And finally, the back side of your head comes into contact again with the floor. Now, this is a neutral spinal position. This allows us to find and feel what the natural curves of the spine are. So when we're going through our practice, then we are trying to maintain this sort of alignment a lot of times in creating length and maintaining length through the spine. Now, to understand the different tilts of the pelvis, we are going to stay here laying on the back, but we're going to take the pelvis and rock it back so that your low back presses into the floor and it removes that gap between the low back and the floor. And then take your pelvis so it tilts forward and it excessively exaggerates the low back curve. So when we tilt the pelvis back, it elongates the low back and presses it firm into the floor and just barely lifts up the tail away from the floor toward the knees. And then we tilt the pelvis forward and create that excessive curvature of the low back. So this is a forward tilt and a backward tilt of the pelvis. Now when we're trying to find a neutral spine, we're not really doing either of those. We're somewhere in between those two actions. Now what I'd like to do is walk you through how to find engaged belly and midline through playing with these different actions and tilts of the pelvis. So tune into your breath. As you exhale, you're going to tilt the pelvis backward and draw the belly in, press the low back firm into the floor, really engage the abdomen to do this. And as you inhale, relax that action back to a natural, normal curvature of the low back. Exhale, draw the belly in, press the low back firm into the floor, engage the abdomen, and relax. We'll do this one more time. Exhale, belly draws in, press the low back into the floor firmly, and relax. Now, by doing this action, you will feel a lot of activity happening in the belly. We're going to take this action that we're learning here laying on our back and apply it into poses later on. So remember what this feels like. Next, what I'd like to do is, if it's okay and it feels okay on your low back, you're going to extend your legs fully across your mat. Take your arms by your sides, and this is just another way to find this kind of abdominal engagement that we can apply in later poses. Now what I'd like you to do is reach your fingertips along your sides, lift your head and shoulders away from the floor, and press your low back firm into the floor. Again, you're going to feel a lot of activity going on through the belly region, and relax back down. We'll try that one more time. Exhale, draw the belly in, lift the shoulders and head away from the floor, Press your low back firm into the floor and relax. Okay, so these are actions that I want you to take note of because we're going to try to find this sort of engagement later on. Next, flip over onto your belly. And what we're going to do here is try to find that same sort of engagement of the abdomen so that we can maintain a neutral spine and protect our low back, especially when we're going into these kind of prone positions where we're laying on our belly or into back bends. So what I'd like you to do is take your forehead to the floor. You can keep your arms or your hands planted along your sides near your shoulders. Now, squeeze your glutes really hard and notice how that automatically takes some pressure off of your low back. Now release the glutes and notice how the belly will naturally kind of drop into the floor, and we have maybe not an excessive curve of the low back, but we can feel it more when we are relaxed. And you may be able to sense that your pelvis is gently tilting forward in the direction of the floor. Now this is shortening the low back. Now by just engaging the glutes, squeeze the butt, we take some pressure out of the low back. Now what I want you to think about is pulling the belly up away from the floor. And this creates a flat low back position where we are long across the low back, it's broadened, and we're really engaging our abdomen and our glutes to keep the low back protected and safe. This is going to be an action that I'm going to ask you to find and engage when we're doing different back bend positions and plank positions. Is I want you to have a stability through your low back and midline so that we aren't excessively arching the low back. All right, so we've figured out what a neutral spinal position is, what different pelvic tilts are by laying down on our back and by laying on our belly. Now we're bringing it to the wall. So what I'd like you to do is find a wall space that you can stand very close to. You don't have to be touching it or leaning into it, but you're gonna be standing very close to it. And just have your feet right underneath your hips. Now ground down through your feet, feel like you're rooting down into the earth, and grow tall through the crown of your head. Arms are at your sides, and see if you can find that same neutral position of the spine, the same position you did while lying on your back, where you had those natural curves of the spine without having to exert any effort. We want to see if we can find those same natural curves throughout our spine as we're standing here. Now, once you feel like you've got this, the wall is acting as the floor did when you were lying on your back. So if you were to touch the wall, you would feel contact between your sacrum and the wall, the slight curvature away of the low back, the curvature of the upper back touching the wall, then the neck curve moving away, and then finally the very back of your head touching the wall. Now, that action we found when laying on our backs and pressing the low back into the floor, I want you to engage that action without having any change or movement in the spine. So I'm going to act as if I'm trying to pull my belly button back toward my low back, toward my spine, as if I'm going to press my low back into the wall, except it's not going to happen. I'm not actually creating any movement through my spine, but what I am doing is engaging the low belly and the abdomen here. And by engaging these muscles and doing this action, I am protecting my low back and taking any unnecessary pressure off of that area. Now, this is the kind of engagement that we want to have so that we can maintain neutral spine and find midline stability throughout all sorts of different poses. Now, I'd like to clarify the different positions and actions of the pelvis so that we have a terminology to use as we go forward. We learned how to tilt the pelvis forward and backward. So forward creates the arch in the low back, and backward creates the rounding in the low back. These positions in yoga are also known as cat tilt, this is dog tilt, this is cat tilt. On hands and knees, it looks like this. Dog tilt is a forward tilt of the pelvis. Cat tilt is a backward tilt of the pelvis. So in different positions and poses that we practice, we are either trying to find the in-between position between the cat and the dog tilt, neutral, but sometimes whether we're doing a forward bend or a backward bend, we have to try to take our pelvis into one of these tilts in order to find neutral. So I'd like to show you that in a seated position, in a forward bend, and in a backward bend. So when we sit, say in a cross-legged seat, if I were to be really relaxed here, I would probably have a slight rounding of my low back. And this is not neutral, as we've defined neutral. So in order for me to find neutral, I need to create the action of dog tilt, which is taking my pelvis slightly behind. You'll notice that brought in a slight curvature of my low back. Now when I relax, this is more like cat tilt of the pelvis, and this is not neutral. So when I'm seated, if it's really difficult for me to find a neutral position by taking that action of dog tilt slightly into my seated posture, I may need to elevate my hips onto a blanket, a bolster, or a towel, and that allows me to, I'm relaxed right now and I'm not even having to try to find that dog tilt through my pelvis. So that's one aspect to consider when performing seated postures. Now in forward bending postures, if I'm going to maintain a neutral position through my spine, again, I'm gonna have to find some amount of dog tilt. So if I hinge forward like this and I round through my low back, this isn't necessarily bad, but this is not a neutral position. So in order for me to find neutral, I might slightly bend my knees a little bit and find that action of dog tilt to take me into a neutral and elongated spinal position. Now, if I'm taking this into a gentle back bend while standing, if I just lean back into this back bend, I'm probably going to dump into my low back, create some amount of pressure or pain here. So what I want to think about to reduce any added pressure or pain in my low back is cat tilt, or really emphasizing the squeeze of the glutes to find neutral, the lifting of my pubic bone toward my belly button, and out of this position, I can then create a smooth curve, and now I feel it through my entire back, not just in my low back. So I know that we've gone through a lot of information around neutral spine and midline stability, and my hope is that this gives you a better understanding of how to organize your body so that you feel good throughout your asana practice.